I'm Gin Dumcias, and this is the Codcast, Commonwealth Beacon's podcast about policy and civic life here in Massachusetts. Today, I'm joined by Phil Eng, the general manager of the MBTA. Eng was hired by Governor Maura Healey in March 2023 to spearhead a turnaround of the troubled public transit agency. He's a civil engineer who came from New York, previously serving as president of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority's commuter rail and as interim president of New York City Transit. Thank you for being here.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and have a chance to talk to your readers and your listeners.
Well, thank you. I will say I am probably one of the happier customers of the T because I take the boat most days, and it's 35 minutes each way of uninterrupted laptop time, and the days that are it's nice out, you just sit on the deck and watch the world go by.
Well, I have the ability to take the East Boston Ferry as well as part of my commute, and while it's a shorter trip than yours, I do get to enjoy that as well, as even if it is a third seat to my trip.
Well, so I do want to touch on ferries and kind of talk of expansion. But first, I wanted to kind of delve into the state of the T. I do have colleagues who do not come in as fresh-faced as I do in the morning after a boat ride. There's still some frustration. There's still some, I think there is a sense of overall improvement. But I would say, what's your take on where the T is at and where does it need to go?
The future is bright, I'll say that again. I know just over 2 years ago when I first had the opportunity to interview and speak with the governor and the lieutenant governor on the needs of transportation. They've been true to their words with regards to making it a priority and fixing this for the public. Because transportation, all modes, and a multimodal system is the way that the system really serves the public and best, whether it's businesses, whether it's quality of life, housing, jobs, and just for pleasure. When we took over 2.5 years ago, obviously the system was slowing down. We were degrading service, and actually confidence had been lost. Over the last 2.5 years, we've done a tremendous amount of rebuilding our workforce. Thank you to the governor. Thank you to the legislature. And that workforce is not just more numbers. It's how we've been retraining our workforce to ensure that they have the skills and the ability to not only fix the system for today, but as we build for the future. And the other key component is we've only scratched the surface on what we can do. And it's been 2.5 years. Speed restrictions were tackled in 2024. And as they pop up, we tackle them quickly now. The idea is not to let it get back into that state of disrepair that we were facing. And that's why this year we continue to have diversions to actually bring that condition of the tracks to where we want it to be. Last year, I think at the end of 24, we were probably about 60% state of good repair in our track system. By the end of this year, we think we're going to be closer to 75-80 across our heavy rail, light rail. And that, again, that is just one component. We're focused on signals. We're focused on new rolling stock. And just earlier this week, the governor signed the supplemental budget with the support, again, of the legislature. And that is really going to give us the stability to now build on successes and keep them long-lasting.
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to grow up in Quincy, four Red Line stations, a commuter rail station, pretty strong bus network. And I remember thinking back about 2.5 years ago, in that lost confidence of feeling like this was, in my 35 years of taking the T, it was rough. Like I think I stopped taking the Red Line because it was so unreliable. I took the commuter rail. Now, obviously, I was able to do that because I could just take a bus to Quincy Center and hop straight onto South Station. But I did want to ask, what was your sense when you got there? My sense was that there was some inertia, and for any number of reasons, the pandemic wasn't really taken advantage of in terms of kind of fixing service. What was kind of the culture there when you got to the T?
The challenge in the roles that I observed was I think there was too much a dependence on external experts, and as the owner, we needed to rebuild that internal institutional knowledge, but also the decision-making and the accountability of these decisions. So some of the things I saw, I think, is, just when you are facing public scrutiny in the manner that the T was facing, I think sometimes it's hard to think big, think bold. And again, I wasn't here pre-2023, but I also know that really the challenge was we had to think bold, we had to think big, because we were just basically status quo, and every day a new speed restriction would crop up, and we were basically going towards shutting down the system if you asked me if we continue down this path. Really, though, with the rebuilding of our leadership team, both internally and externally, we have a lot of forward thinkers, a lot of people that are in these roles because they are not afraid of making decisions. And we know every day there's a new challenge, and every day something could crop up. And there's things that we can control and there's things that we can't. But at the end of it, it's what does the public need, and how do we deliver those results sooner, and make sure that when we get investments like we just recently got, that we spend the money wisely in delivering more reliable, safe service, more frequent service. We want transportation to be where people don't have to think, should I use mass transportation? Just go to the station, go to the system, and know that your train, your bus, the ferry, they will be there, right? Those are paramount, and that's over the last 2 years. We have done that. The schedules have been more robust. The frequencies of the trains are greater. The frequencies of the buses are greater. The drop trips have dropped dramatically. In fact, I reported, I think, at one of the last board meetings, back in 23, with 75,000 bus trips a week, we had, I think, 8.8% drop trips. Last May, or this May, I should say, only 0.6% drop trips. That's a huge difference. That goes to the hiring. That goes to the training. That goes to scheduling. It also goes to something that's probably, that people don't see, vehicle maintenance, and making sure our equipment is functioning the way it is. And I think we all know over the last few days, air conditioning on our system was vital because of the heat wave that we've experienced here in Massachusetts.
I did want to turn on something about the subway and something when you were talking about investment. Something that's obviously cropped up over the years as a topic has been extending service into late night, essentially, keeping it going for longer. I think there's a question of, can Boston, is there a market for Boston? Because Universal Hub, I think, cheekily says Boston is the city that always sleeps, or something along those lines. But what's your sense about where are we with later subway service? Is that feasible? Is that on the table, or is that so far down the road that's not it's not being considered yet?
I will say that we are constantly looking at how we can improve service. And that means not only in our current window, but how do we actually expand it at some point and right-size it too? Because, and I use this example all the time, during the pandemic, mass transportation was still vital. Mass transportation continued because we still had so many essential workers, whether you're a hospital worker, whether you're a retail worker, that have to get to the places of business and to support the public. So in that case, I think it demonstrates that we need to take a look at how we run service and when we run service. Just as an example, a lot of the special events, whether it was the Celtics parade, whether it was New Year's Eve, whether it's 4th of July, when we run more service and we run later service, it shows that we can do that, and then that's a one-day event. What we need to do is look at how do we do it in a more sustainable way that where we're doing it, where when we do it, it stays successful. And I'll just use a different example where water transportation is something, and we talked a little earlier about our commutes. We slowly, over the last 2 years, we purchased 3 boats because we knew not only for the services that we picked up, a new Lynn service, the Winthrop service, but we also want to expand it. So with the boats we purchased, we're able to take the Quincy and Winthrop services and during the week, shorten the trip on Winthrop, but also now weekend service, which was not there before. So these are the things that we are finding that where we see a demand, we want to be able to do. And there are still things that we're looking at with regards to later service and when that later service would benefit. Even myself living in East Boston, I know folks that rely on the Logan Airport and the ability to know that the T can get you, whether it's to the airport or from the airport. I think it's something that I do want to look at.
On the ferry expansion, I did want to ask something I noticed in New York was just how frequent it was going back and forth, under the Brooklyn Bridge and all that. And I know that is probably likely due to the density of the area, right? There's a lot of demand. When you're thinking about expanding ferry service, how much is density a factor, in terms of factoring in demand?
Well, I'll use the example of the recent Blue Line closure where there's really, aside from alternative bus service, we had to rely on water transportation. And because of the demand, I give kudos to David Perry, my head of water transportation, and the whole team. They were turning that boat in East Boston every 15 minutes, something where that's basically cutting the schedule in half because of the need. Now, they did that with our existing resources. In the future, one of the things that we need to look at is if we were to run that frequent, would the demand still be there? And obviously, this was because the Blue Line work had to be done. But I've seen other areas where we need more demand, weekends where the boats are not big enough. So we are constantly looking at how do we do that? How do we have backup boats? How do we get larger boats? Right now we're taking a look at what else out there that we can purchase and continue to grow water transportation. Really excited about that. And we're talking with other water transportation providers in the area to make sure that we're working hand in hand and finding ways to continue to not only serve the routes we have today, but where do other routes need to be accommodated?
Yeah, in terms of like year-round weekend service, for folks who might not know, the ferry really only runs year-round between Monday and Friday, and then the I believe the weekend service runs from Memorial Day to sometime in October maybe. So I'll say this: my neighbors and I, who in Weymouth, who go to the Hingham shipyard and enjoy the ferry quite a bit. It is frustrating that during the winter we can't take the ferry into Boston on weekends. So is that also on the table in terms of?
There have been some trips where I've taken on the ferries where some riders have asked me about that, and we are looking at the capabilities. This all ties to the ability to have not only the boats that we would need to, but the crews that we would need to do that. And perhaps, it might not be where initially we have the resources to do year-round every weekend, I'll say. But there might be opportunities where there's special events. There's, and I'll just use it. One of the riders asked me, the tree lighting ceremony. Why not have the ability to run ferries and allow people to use that? So these are things that we're talking about. And again, we want to make sure that we are allowing people to use mass transportation as an option and make it available to them. And then if we run it, we want to monitor it and make sure people are using these services. But the ability is to make sure it's reliable, sustainable, and then that's where the value comes to the public.
I think the other thing too is just building demand or allowing demand to build. Two examples I kind of think of is the Kennedy Greenway, and I remember shortly after it opened, the Globe wrote about basically nobody was on the Greenway, and it's like I believe Mayor Menino at the time said, let people become accustomed to it. And I also saw that on the Greenbush line, which runs near my house, where I think early on there might have been some feeling. Certainly, I know on Beacon Hill there were some folks who were like, well, maybe this is a boondoggle. There's not that many people taking it. And then a couple of years later, I'm commuting in. I was at the Boston Business Journal, and I remember the train was packed. It was wall to wall. You could barely move in those commuter rail trains. I assume that's also being factored in too. Of just if you build it or build a service, people probably will come, or you just got to give it time for people to adjust their schedules to it.
I think it's both. One of the things that I do like to do is I get out and I talk to the different communities, not only the communities that we serve currently, but the communities that we hope to serve one day in the future. I also look at it from the perspective of, yes, there are certain routes that have so much demand that we need to find a way to do better and increase capacity. But there's also routes where even if the demand isn't there, the people rely on the ability to use mass transportation. So how do I balance those needs? How do I not lose sight of? And this was where I had the opportunity when in my prior roles in New York, when I took on statewide roles. You realize that, even though the mega projects I had in New York City are things that make headlines, the smaller projects that are out in the suburbs, they're just as important to those communities. And whether it's 50 people or whether it's millions of people, those transportation projects support quality of life, support housing, support businesses. It's just a different magnitude of importance. But to every one person, transportation is personal. And it's my responsibility to figure out how to best balance that and actually support, everyone across the Commonwealth.
The sounds focusing on both the big and the small, that sounds like something that Mayor Menino would have appreciated. So I did want to dive into the commuter rail. I know for the future there's talk about turning it into within 128 every 15-minute, kind of almost like subway service. How is that going to be done, especially with a contract that right now or the new contract is going to look like, whoever gets it looks very similar to the current commuter rail contract?
Well, the contract, which expires in 2027, and the new contract that right now is in the early phases of procurement, are the request for qualifications soon to go out. One of the things is not just operating our system. We're going to be building into it, how do we improve the system? And you talk about more frequency, subway-like frequency. Some of the things that I am going to focus on as we deliver future capital projects and as we look to continue to improve service, it's not just the frequency, but it's the ability to actually address some of the pinch points within our infrastructure. So if we have single-track territory, I really need to take a look at double-track territory. And if we want to run longer distance trips, I need to look at the ability to fit express trains as well. Because I also know that, as we build stations and we have more frequent trains, every train stopping at every station, for the people that are trying to travel the longest distances, they will look for shorter trips. And if it's not on the train, then I'm not encouraging them to use mass transportation. So the key thing is I need to look at where our infrastructure needs to be more robust and able to handle those things. Now, that doesn't mean we can't get to more improved frequencies. So, for instance, the Fairmont line with the battery electric multiple units that is ongoing right now, we intend to get to 20-minute frequencies when that system is up and running in 2028. We currently have signal upgrades that are going on the Worcester corridor. And those signal upgrades, when done sometime towards the end of next year, will allow us to get to, I believe, 30-minute headways. At the same time, I need to make sure, where are those meets? Because I think some people have been on trains and you can see we're holding for a train to pass. I need to be able to make sure that I have the ability for more resiliency and redundancy in the system. Quite frankly, if a train were to have an issue in single-track territory, it affects the whole corridor. Right? So these are the things where it's not just me saying that we want to do this, it's me making sure that when we get to that point, we can be successful at it. And those are the key things that I'm focused on looking at. And it's important because the traffic congestion right now is something that some folks will never get out of their cars, and I understand that. But there's so many folks that would love to take mass transportation if I could just get to the point where they know they can rely on it day in and day out. And we're moving in that direction. Again, the successes we've shown over the last 2.5 years, I want to even prove that that's just the beginning. We have a lot more in the works to improve rail service. North Station Draw 1, that is a $1 billion project that's going to improve rail service to the north and make it more resilient, make it more capable of, again, more regional rail type service, bidirectional, because travel patterns have changed. It's not just coming into Boston in the morning and going home at the end of a workday. Folks are using it in both directions, and I think that's what makes each stop such an important piece, because now those stops become destinations, whether it's for living, for housing, for businesses and work, or for visiting all the things that you can enjoy in these different communities.
I will say I do enjoy whenever my train crosses the Neponset Bridge, watching the people stuck in traffic over on the Neponset Bridge or the expressway. So good advertisement for the T for sure. I did just as we're coming to the end here, I did kind of want to talk a little bit about you moved to East Boston. You're now an East Boston resident. When you first came to the area, you lived in Cambridge, right by Lamplighter Brewing, I think.
I did, yes.
So did you? and I know you've made new friends and gotten to know folks. My understanding is Mayor Michelle Wu is a big fan of yours. Sends you memes occasionally that she finds online. You've also got someone you know from New York, Rich Davey, who's now over at Massport, and he held your job once. Have you guys had a chance to get together since now that you're both back in Boston?
We do get together. Rich is a regular rider as well on the system, and from time to time he'll share his observations with me, which is great because we're both in transportation and it's important to be able to get that feedback. We do have opportunities to sit down and talk about transportation as a whole. We're getting together actually soon. This is for a breakfast, though. This is not necessarily for a cold beer. But we could do that, too, because, even when Rich was in New York, we were staying in touch. And it's great to have him back here in Massachusetts.
What's the best piece of advice he's given you about handling Boston and Massachusetts?
You know what? Him and I just talk about, I think it's staying focused on the public that we're serving, staying focused on, continuous improvement, and, keeping an even keel. And I think in the business that we're in, that's important because, things change in a split second. But that's why we continue to keep building the workforce, because every time we see these challenges, the workforce responds. And I'm really super excited about the team we're building at MBTA. Over 8,000 strong right now. Over the last 2+ years, we've brought nearly 3,000 new hires to get to that. And I think I said earlier in the interview, it's not just the number of people, but it's how we're going about setting them up for success, training, new skills, giving them the right tools. Because at the end of the day, our workforce is the reason that we're delivering the level of service that we're doing today, but also they're going to be the reason that we're going to make everyone proud of the MBTA going forward, future generations.
So, something I like to ask whenever I have folks on is what's the media diet? What do you consume daily, weekly, long form, short form? What are your favorite things to read?
I always open up my phone in the morning when I wake up, and I think this was in a recent story. I do look at my text first to see if there's anything from my operations folks, and I know he will call me if I need anything from Ryan Caholen, my chief operating officer, or others. But I look at all the media prints. I look at some social media as well. It's the way to keep in touch with the things that are of interest. But also, it's my ability to make sure that, when I read these different things, I take all of it to heart because, within it all, it's feedback, it's commentary, and it's things that I know are true and dear to everyone's heart. And it's the only way for us to improve is to look in the mirror and keep driving the trains, the buses, the ferries in the right direction.
Read anything from New York or anything you carried over from your time in New York?
I do still pop into some New York sites to keep abreast of what's going on. It's interesting from having been there to see the direction things are going. But I also keep abreast of the industry as well because there's a lot of agencies across the country that are facing challenges. Some that are challenges that were similar to where we were a few years ago. And I joke with some of my colleagues and CEOs of, they should be so lucky to be in Massachusetts because we have great leadership, we have great support, and some of them are facing not only fiscal cliffs, but they're actually facing cuts and discussing reducing service and layoffs, and it's a far cry from where we are right now. And I'm pleased to be where I am. And while I may read about them, I can only offer a voice of support.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you again. I appreciate it too, and hopefully I get an opportunity to come back and do this again.
Thanks again to Phil Eng for joining me on the Codcast. Thank you for listening. I'm Gin Dumcias. Our producer is Charlie Cazella. Please leave a rating and a review wherever you're hearing this now if you want to help other folks find us. Or email us at codcast@commonwealthbeacon.org if you ever want to get in touch directly.